Right, let's have a look at a thorny subject in Blender, and that's hotkeys. Now, I don't use all of the keyboard shortcuts for Blender, and the reason for that is that the keyboard on my machine doesn't actually have a numeric keypad. Now, there's a lot more keyboard shortcuts you can use than I'm going to show you here, but these are the ones that I find the most useful, and I think you will too. So, let's go into Blender. This is Blender 2.71, which is the latest version. If you haven't got it, go to blender.org and download it for free. And the first thing I'm going to show you is the N key. Now the N key pops up this little menu here, and one of the useful things on here, which I'm going to turn on if you're doing a video like this, is screencast keys, which puts a little area down in the bottom left that shows people what keys you're pressing. And since this is a keyboard shortcut tutorial, that's, I would guess, would be quite useful to you. But there's other things in the N menu as well. There's these transforms. If you want to move something exactly, rotate it exactly, or scale it exactly, you can type in numbers here and do it. And of course you can lock them so that nothing else will affect it. That can come in quite useful sometimes. You can also do the same thing over here in that menu there, but you can't lock them. Here you've got the ability to lock them. So that's why it's the N key to open this menu. N for numeric. Just press the N key again, which hides it, gets it out of the way. And on the left here, similarly, we have this menu here that's called the Tools menu. If you need a bit more space, you can press the T key and get rid of that. A lot of people never ever use the Tools menu. They use keyboard shortcuts, and that's it. You can press T again, of course, to get it back again. Now this is all happening in object mode. Okay. Now a lot of the keyboard shortcuts work just as well in edit mode as they do in object mode. Edit mode has a few extra, which I shall show you in a little while. And the first useful thing is we need to add some objects to see it. So I'm going to add in a few more things. I'm going to add in our wonderful monkey, Suzanne as she is known. She's kind of Blender's mascot. She's quite useful actually for looking at materials with. I'm going to add in a cylinder, and there we go. And what this lets me demonstrate is the A key, which is another really useful key. Press A, everything deselects. Press A again, everything selects, and you can toddle it on and off to your heart's content. So if you want to select everything in a scene, then use the A key, but do beware that it also selects your lights and your camera in object mode. In edit mode it doesn't, because you're only editing the object that you've got selected. So that's the A key. Now there's selecting things. Now I find the most useful selection tool out is what's called the marquee selection tool, and to do that you press down the control key and the left mouse button and you just draw. There you go. And now I've selected everything that was completely inside that shape that I drew, and the shape can be any shape you like. And that's very useful because it's easy to not select things like the camera and the light. It's also easy to cut a group of objects out. I hit A to deselect, and we'll do that again. So control, left mouse button, and we'll just select these two this time. Easy, wasn't it? So that is probably the most useful selection functions in Blender, is A and control left mouse button. Now there's a couple more. There's B for box, which allows you to draw a box, so you press B, crosshairs appear, you draw a box, everything that's in the box gets selected. Deselect again. The C for circle, and as you can see we've now got a circle that's appeared under the cursor. By rotating the middle mouse wheel you can reduce or increase the size of this. This is actually most useful in edit mode, but hey, it works in object mode, so I'm going to show it to you. So there you go. That's those two selected using circle select. Now the thing to remember about circle select is that you can't get rid of the circle until you press the escape key, and you can't do anything else until you press the escape key, so always remember that escape key. So the next key I'm going to show you is moving from one layer to another. Now down here there's a set of layers, and this can be very useful if you're just working on one object in your scene and you don't want everything else to get in the way and clutter it up so you can't see what you're doing. Then you can move things to an unused layer. So I'll hit M, so you can see that a layer dialog comes up, and I'll select, I'll move it to that layer there, and there you go, they've disappeared from here. Now if I click down here, which is the visible layers, I can turn that layer on and get them back again, and if I shift and click on the other one I can get them all, because I've got both those layers switched on, but these two are still on the other layer. Now layers can be very useful when you're using some of the simulation options. I'm not going to go through that in this video, but just bear it in mind. So let's move them all back again. I'm going to move them back to that first layer, and as you can see they've disappeared, and there we are back on that layer again. Now everything's as it was before. Now there's another way to make everything as it was before. If I shift these up, let's say I didn't want to do that. And here are two of the most useful key combinations in Blender. If you learn no other key shortcuts, learn these. You've got Control Z, that's undo, and if you've got more than two fingers you've got Shift Control Z, which is redo. So you can Control Z, you can Shift Control Z to your heart's content. So if you make a mistake, it's very easy to get back. Just hit Control Z. Extremely useful. Now another thing that's useful sometimes is hiding stuff. Let's say for some reason I want to put our monkey inside a box. So I'll scale it down and I'll show you a bit more about that function I use there in a minute. And there we go, we're inside a box. Now let's say I want to edit that monkey. I can't see that monkey, which is a bit of a problem. And this happens quite often, more often than you would think, when you're actually in the middle of a scene. You've got lots of objects around, you've got some big stuff, like you've got big background planes with images on. You don't want to be able to, you don't want to have them in the way. So Blender's got a neat function. So if I select that cube there, I'll press H and it hides it. And that is exactly the same, but it's a lot quicker than, especially if you've got a lot of objects in the scene, pressing up here, restrict viewport visibility. And as you can see, that turns it on and off. But there is a keyboard shortcut for getting it back as well, of course, and that is simply Alt H. So Alt H brings it back, and H hides it. So we can now edit our monkey. And we can Alt H, whoops, not Control H, Alt H to get it back again. That's something Blender's quite good at. A lot of the keyboard commands don't actually overlap. So there we go. That's those. And the next thing is when you want to get rid of something. You want to get rid of something, you want to delete it completely. X. I've got the cube selected, so it's obviously going to delete the cube. And it deleted Suzanne as well. Why was that? Because Suzanne was also selected. So if I hit Ctrl Z, get it all back again, right click on the cube again. Now the cube is the only thing that's selected, as you can see. Suzanne's dull cube is selected. I can hit X and I can delete the cube. How useful that Ctrl Z actually is. It's a brilliant thing. Okay, now for moving things around. Of course you can move things around using these handles down here. That little button turns it on, and I can move things around in X, Y and Z. It's not always convenient to use these handles. I can show you why. If I hit view, view selected, and I shift it down here, and I keep shifting it down there, oh, I've lost that handle, but I still want to move it. What am I going to do? The only way to do that and keep the view the same, which is a thing you sometimes want to do, is to use the G command. G for grab. So if I hit G, I can move it around all over the place, which sometimes is useful, more often it isn't. Or I can choose an axis to constrain it to, which is what I was doing with the handle earlier. I was moving it along the green axis, which is Y. So if I still press the G down, hit Y, I've now constrained it so it will actually only move along that axis, which is pretty brilliant. But it moves a long way, as you can see. When I move the mouse, it moves a long way. Sometimes you want to do it so that you can do it more precisely, and the way to do that is still with the G button pressed down, hit S, and now you'll see it moves. It's like there's a gearing between the mouse and the object you're moving. Sometimes you want to do the opposite thing. Sometimes you want to move it exact steps, but quite a long way, and Control key lets you do that. So I've got the G key still pressed down. I haven't let go of it. Obviously I have let go of the Y key. So I'm now going to press Control. So you can see it's jumped to the nearest whole Blender unit. Now if you look down the bottom left hand of the screen, you can see where it says D-3 along global Y, and I'll move the mouse and you can see it jumps in steps of one Blender unit at a time. So if you want to position something exactly on a grid, and that grid happens to be one Blender unit, this is quite useful. And a lot of people will make a scene on a one Blender unit grid and then scale it to whatever the heck they want, simply because this is such a useful thing to do. And of course you can constrain it in other angles as well, and if you hit the left key it accepts it, so it'll leave it where you put it if you hit the left mouse button. But if I G and grab that again, and I'll keep it as constrained to Y, if I hit the right mouse button, it cancels it, which can be quite useful. So you can play around with it and so on and so forth. Now, as I said, you can also do GX, which will move it in the other direction, and Shift and Control works just the same as it did before. Escape, which comes out of practically anything in Blender, and you can do G and Z, which will move it just up and down. So that's how you move things around using keyboard shortcuts, and it's a very useful way of doing it. Often the handles are in a place where you can't see them. This is especially so if you're working at a very small scale with rotate, because these things can get enormous. If I scale this down now, I'll scale that right the way down, you can see this is the problem, that you zoom in, just do a view selected, and all of a sudden everything gets very difficult. Sometimes you can't even see the handles, so handles aren't always useful. So we just had the rotation handles up. Let's look at rotating with a keyboard shortcut. R for rotate, and that rotates it around whatever view axis you happen to be looking at it on, which is usually not what you want. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, but just as before you can constrain it. So I can type in Z, and that constrains it to rotate just around the Z axis, and the same with X and Y. And Shift does exactly the same thing. Shift introduces a gearing, a hell of a lot of gearing actually. So as you can see, I have to do one full rotation for a tiny little movement. This lets you really position, so that's Shift. Okay, and Control moves things in 5-degree increments. Very good for if you want to move something an exact number of degrees, if you want to move it exactly 90 degrees, for example. And there we are at 0 degrees. As you can see. Now if I wanted to move it exactly 90 degrees, R, Z, and I can move it 90 degrees one way or 90 degrees the other. So that's moved it 90 degrees. Of course you can also type 90 degrees into there, but hey, that's not so much fun, especially if you've got a big screen full of stuff and you've squashed your toolbox down so that you can see everything. You don't really want to try and use these boxes then, because you can't see what the heck is in them. It's a lot easier to use keyboard shortcuts. And finally, scale. S for scale, pretty obvious really. G for grab, R for rotate, S for scale. And moving it in and out, that scales everything on all axes. You might not want to do that. You might just want to scale the Z, like that. And I did that by hitting the Z key, obviously. Works exactly the same. And just as before, Shift gives you a bit of gearing between the mouse and the scale effect, and Control does things in increments of 0.1. Left mouse button to accept, right mouse button to reject, and I can Control Z, of course, to undo. So, my next little tip is for rendering. Now a lot of scenes take a long time to render, and you don't really want to render all of them. Let's just go into camera view here for a minute, and we'll set something up so that you can see it more easily. I'm going to scale that cylinder up, and this isn't going to take long to render, to say the least. It's going to be very quick. So, render image. Whoops. Where's Suzanne gone? No material on Suzanne, that's why. Right, let's do that again. Render image. And we still can't see Suzanne. That's very interesting. Have I hidden Suzanne by accident? Yes. Suzanne is actually hidden. She's hidden from the render view. So you can see down. Now this is a bug that I do wish that they'd fix in Blender. If you move it away from the standard sizes, the menu system goes berserk, but hey. So I can turn rendering back on again. Can't for the life of me remember turning it off, but never mind. Render image again, there we go. Now let's say this was a scene that took a long time to render, and you wanted just to be able to render a little bit of it. Well, we can do that, and the way that we can do it is Shift B. But render, hang on a minute. Right, let's get this right. Shift B, and that's set up the window, and render image, and it just renders that little bit. Very useful if you've got a large complicated scene, you've just made a change, you want to check the change is right, but you don't want to spend half an hour waiting for it to render. You're just going to spend a minute rendering the little bit that you've changed. Very, very useful. Okay, so let's go to the edit mode, and we'll make some changes to some of these objects. First of all, I'm going to move that out of the way a bit, and we're going to edit this here shape here, this cylinder. So, to get to edit mode, of course, you can use the menu system here. But there's another way of doing it. There's a keyboard shortcut which is very quick. Tab. Hit the tab key, it takes you between object mode and edit mode. And since you're always coming in and out when you're editing and creating objects, it's a very useful key to know. So here we are in edit mode, and there's some little things that are very useful. Now the first one is E for extrude. So if I go into face select mode by clicking this little box down here with the face, I'm just going to select the top face, I'm going to hit E, and that gives us a new set of vertices, and it goes along the normal of the face that you've selected. Okay, and you can go downwards as well, and this is one way of creating something. And then you can hit S for scale, make it bigger, make it smaller, do what the heck you like with it. So that's E. Okay. Now if you're doing some quite complicated work and you're playing around with geometry, let's get rid of a face or two. Shift and right click, actually select multiple things. X for delete faces. Now as you can see, we've just deleted that face. Now you can also extend vertices, which sounds a bit crazy, but bear with me. And if I hit E, you can see I've got a little line there that's moving out, and let's say I want to constrain that to the x-axis only, so it moves along X, there we go. And now I want a face that joins those up. So what I do is I select those all by shift and right clicking the individual vertices like that, and then by pressing the F key I can put a face in. As you can see, you've now got quite an odd shape. So that's the face key, and that's quite useful when you're editing. Now let's say you want to make some of this a separate object or duplicate it. You can do that fairly easily, and if I'm going to do a circle select, I'm going to change it and hit escape. A to get rid of that, C for circle, reduce the size of it, and I'm going to select those and hit escape to get rid of the circle select. Now I can separate those selected parts out by hitting P, and that brings up a menu. Now I can separate the selection, I can separate things that are different materials, and I can separate by loose parts. And I'll show you loose parts in a minute, but I'm going to hit selection. As you can see, that's gone out of the edit mode now, and all we can edit is this bit, and the reason for that is the selection is now a separate object. So if I hit tab, go into object mode, you can see that now that is a separate object. I hit G, Z, you can see that has been cut off. Now I'm going to join Suzanne on to our peculiar looking thing here, and if we come down here, I want to select, so I've now got Suzanne and our sort of top hatty shape selected. I'm going to hit join. So now we've got a compound object. We've got an object that's made out of several bits and pieces. If it selects as one object, because it is one object, I'll hit G for grab and it moves around as one object. And if I go and edit it, then as you can see, it's all one object because everything on there can be edited. Now there's times when you want to separate them out again. Sometimes if you're changing materials, it's easier to have two objects, and you think, oh no, if only I could get those back. Well, if we hit the P key, and then you can select by loose parts, which will go through and it will decide what parts aren't linked together. As you can see, we're now into two objects again. Hang on a minute. Just make sure we've got one selected. G for grab, R for rotate. There we go. And in the case of Suzanne, her eyes are actually separate objects, so it's separated those out for us as well. Just to make life fun. But it will separate out every single object. And apart from one last hotkey, and this is used in animating, then we're there. And I'll show you that hotkey now. Let's go and give Suzanne a material. That's useful. Get rid of that one, and we're going to give it a colour. Colour is going to be red. Now let's suppose during the course of our animation, which is this is the time bar down here for animation, we want to change the colour from red to green. Okay, so we want it to take 2 seconds. 2 seconds would be frame 50 or thereabouts. So I go to frame 50, and that's where I want to change it to green. Now a lot of things in Blender you can keyframe, as well as the positions and rotations, and one of the things you can keyframe is colour. So let's go to the beginning of the animation. I want to set a keyframe here, and the hotkey we use, we hover it over, and the hotkey we use is I. Now not everything you can keyframe, but you can keyframe an awful lot. So there we go, and we'll go to frame 50. We'll change the colour to a nice pretty green, and we'll hover our mouse button over it, hit I. You can see there now we have 2 keyframes, and if I set the end frame to maybe 60 or so, then if I cycle through it, and you can see this is then changing from red to green. Not terrifically exciting, you say, but there's an awful lot more that you can do with that. You can animate a heck of a lot of things with the I key, so I is useful in animation. Well, that's about it. Those are all the hotkeys that I find incredibly useful. There's lots and lots of others, and many people have got their favourites which I haven't actually gone into, but if you learn those, you'll know your way around Blender pretty well. Thanks a lot. Please subscribe.